We can either, well, actually, it's just 2:30. We can either choose to wait a little bit longer for any more participants, or you can probably begin now. Oh, Jacob, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yep, right. I just got it. Yep.
Okay.
Which do you think would be better for the group?
A good amount of participants right now, and they're all kind of just going in right now, so you can probably just introduce yourself and start getting started.
Okay, sure. Yep, I can get started. Hello, everyone. I am Jacob Umans, and today I'm really glad to be hosting this workshop to offer some advice on making the most of research experiences. This is more geared towards research experiences at the high school to undergraduate age groups. So before I get into too many details about my thoughts, I just want to talk a little bit about my own scientific journey, really what my experience is. I guess even before I, even before I got involved in research, I've been really active in the National Youth Association and science outreach. I really think that what you're all doing, being part of an ideathon, working with your peers to try to solve modern neuroscientific challenges is really commendable. And I think getting involved with this sort of community is an incredible way to start thinking about. My first formal research experience happened after my junior year of high school at the Salk Institute in San Diego, California. I joined one of their structured research programs, and I think this experience was really the first time I got to work in a lab, got to see the techniques, got to learn how researchers go from hypothesis to designing experiments to a conclusion, and how to present results to other scientists in a coherent manner. I think afterwards, I actually independently reached out to professors to secure a summer research position at UC Irvine during the summer after my senior year of high school. While there, my primary research focus was how cell surface sugars regulate the differentiation of neural stem cells into neurons or glia. And most recently, actually, from a recommendation from the principal investigator at UC Irvine, I joined the Theo Palmer lab at Stanford University, where I spent most of my entire undergraduate education trying to understand how interactions between the brain and immune systems shape the development and maturation of the brain and neural circuits. I think, honestly, these experiences have all been incredibly valuable to me, and throughout this presentation, I hope to share really some of the key insights that I learned from doing research, talking with my friends who've been involved with research that might help you make your research experiences go more smoothly. So I think the two big topics that I want to talk about are finding the right lab, making sure that the lab you join is a good fit for you, and making the most out of your research experience once you've joined a lab. And the first topic I want to talk about, I'll just start with finding the right lab. So the first thing I want to talk about are going to be what I call the 3 T's of a rewarding experience: teaching, the topic, and the technique. When I say teaching, I'm referring to the sort of mentorship environment in the lab. And this doesn't mean just how much you're going to meet with the principal investigator, but really are the grad students or postdocs that you'll be working with friendly and eager to offer advice when you need it? Are there lots of new skills to learn? Are you going to be maybe working long-term, dedicating yourself to one project, or maybe just doing a little bit all around. And this is really important because especially at the high school to undergrad stage, your goal mindset shouldn't be that you need to make a big discovery, that you need to get, say, a first or second author paper. It's primarily about learning, equipping yourselves with the skills you need to continue using your scientific mindset in research and medicine or something else for the rest of your lives. So I would say this is just incredibly important to be thinking about when you're joining the lab. The second thing I want to talk about is the topic. I mean, many of you, even if you haven't fully decided on a subfield yet, probably have maybe just even a general sense of what types of questions you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in studying model organisms to try to understand new biological pathways. Maybe you're interested in understanding the neurobiology of disease. I think whatever it is, you should be thinking about the topic that the lab is interested in. Make sure it aligns with what you care about. Because if you really want to make an impact in the lab, it's going to be important to really understand what it is they're doing. Try to read a lot of papers, figure out potentially what future directions they might be able to consider. And to do this, to develop this sort of commitment, it's just much easier if you're invested in the type of problem that the lab is working in. Finally, the techniques. Now, some of you may be really interested in hands-on wet lab work, just going in with the pipettes, PCR, animal work, that sort of thing. Others might like computational work, just writing your code to analyze complex data sets and try to make new discoveries that way. I mean, both of those are really respectable things. And honestly, if you're anywhere in between, maybe you really like cell culture work, but feel a bit squeamish around mice, those are all fine. And you should really consider what you're comfortable with, what types of skills you want to learn, how you want to contribute to the lab, to make sure that the specific work you'll be doing is going to be something that you feel that you can learn from, something that you're going to enjoy. I think of these three, sort of my own rough rating of importance would be, that teaching is just absolutely essential, that you need to be in an environment where you're going to be able to learn. And that topic also really important, but maybe a secondary consideration, and that sort of specific techniques outside of the question of maybe, will you be comfortable doing this work, should be sort of a third priority. I think that just teaching is so incredibly important, because at least if you're not in an environment where you have good teachers, you really aren't going to have you may not have the opportunity to learn too much about the topic or master a lot of new techniques. It might end up being washing glassware. It could end up being you doing a lot of grunt work, maybe washing glassware, doing one repetitive procedure. So I think it's just, so I really can't emphasize enough how important a good mentorship environment can be to success. I think my mentors have tended to be willing to take extra time to teach me about new techniques, to talk with me about experimental design. And I really feel like those sorts of conversations, maybe even outside of the bench work, have just played an essential role in my scientific development. It's something that I think will really help shape all of you for the better as well. Mm-hmm. And then the next consideration I want to mention, maybe as you decide whether or not to join a lab, is how to think about lab size. I think there are going to be lots of different sizes of labs from maybe just really new labs with maybe 2 or 3 grad students plus the principal investigator. And there could be really, on the other end, there can be really huge, well-established labs, maybe 30 or more people with, say, a really established senior faculty member. I think sort of both have their pros and cons. In a big lab, you're probably going to be likely to have a wider range of resources at your disposal. The professor may have more disposable funds, more opportunities to apply some sort of novel and potentially expensive techniques. However, in such a big lab environment, it can sometimes be hard to get a sense of what everyone else is doing, maybe the broader goals of the lab, and potentially it would be really challenging to find one-on-one time to meet the professor, him or themselves. On the other hand, in a really small lab, there's going to be lots of time to get to know everyone, to get to probably to get to know the professor too. However, in a small lab, I guess the question of resources might be a bit more pressing. And I think especially if it's an assistant professor, maybe they're going to be on a stricter timeline or have stricter experimental goals. So at least I think either size of lab can be a really great environment to learn. I think the question of lab size gets to matter a lot more in graduate school when you're designing your own experiments and directly working with the principal investigator rather than working with the PI, maybe through a grad student or postdoc mentor. However, I still think at least the general themes of this balance should go into consideration. For example, if you really, really, really value one-on-one time with a PI, smaller lab may be the right fit. So with these how do you figure out whether these considerations are met? How do you figure out whether your goals are going to be met in a particular lab environment? Well, you interview the lab. Normally, when you'll reach out to a lab or when you apply to a lab, they'll probably invite you to interview with them before you commit to join. However, this opportunity is as much of an opportunity for you to interview them as it is for them to interview you. Before you meet them, you should definitely be reading their papers, trying to figure out what their main goals are, trying to check whether sort of the topic and techniques that they're using seem appealing to you. And during the interview, you can really be asking about the mentorship environment. You can ask, say, how often you might be able to meet the PI if that's something you really value. You could ask, say, maybe you could ask other students in the lab how they feel about the mentorship environment, or maybe even just like the social community in the lab. I think having friendly lab mates, having people to talk to, if your experiments are a bit tough, it can be really valuable. So I think being able to effectively do this relies upon you thinking about what your priorities are when joining a lab. And I would really encourage everyone to maybe either write down their goals or just think about it before they end up going to the lab interview. Honestly, even if a lab is publishing lots of nature papers, or if you think the techniques they're using are really interesting, if the mentorship environment isn't going to provide what you need, I'd really encourage you to think carefully about whether it's something you want to join. Really, the mentors you work with really have a big impact on how you think about science, how you learn. And being careful to make sure that the environment is just right for you is really important. I would say that taking an extra month or two to find the right lab is far, far better than jumping into a lab to start research sooner, only to realize a few months down the line that the environment may not provide what you need to truly succeed in the fullest way possible. Okay, so I think those are the biggest considerations that I can think of for the finding the right lab. Now, the next set of questions I want to talk about is sort of how you can think about making the most of your research experience. Really, once you've joined a lab, what can you do to make sure that you're succeeding? I think the first thing I'd encourage you to do is really try to talk with your immediate supervisor to set expectations. Try to figure out what your mentor expects of you. Try to talk about what you sort of expect or want from a mentor. I think on your end, I think the first, probably most obvious thing to be thinking about is time commitment. And how much time are you going to commit to a lab? I think it can definitely be challenging to balance lab with schoolwork, extracurriculars, socializing, sleep. So as for time commitment, I think just setting those expectations up front can be really helpful so there's not really any confusion down the line. Then the second thing to be thinking about is sort of how you want to handle schedule conflicts if you have to deviate from that time commitment. For example, maybe during finals weeks, or if there's a personal event in your life that you have to attend to. How are you and your mentor going to navigate those challenges, maybe even if you have experiments running? Sort of planning out how you're going to navigate these situations is really important so you don't end up having to stress out about exams and figuring out how to you don't stress out about exams and communication with your mentor at the last minute. And finally, one thing I'd want to encourage you to talk about is maybe how you're going to be learning maybe outside of bench work. Maybe are you going to dedicate maybe 2 or 3 hours a week to just reading new papers that come out in the field? Are you going to be maybe studying from a neuroscience text, studying your field from a neuroscience textbook in your spare time? Just trying to think about how much time you're going to spend doing some of that extra work, or how much it would help you, can really help you sort of put yourself on the track towards not only contributing to the execution of experiments, but also maybe helping out with some of the data analysis, experimental and potentially experimental design. And those are the big things to think about on your end. Now, sort of things to talk about maybe with your mentor or supervisors, sort of what skills are you going to learn? Is it going to be a situation where maybe they teach you a few skills and then you're just going to be repeatedly using those? Is there going to be a situation where you might be able to learn new, more advanced techniques, maybe as you demonstrate your mastery over new things? Trying to decide what skills that you may want to learn is going to be really important. I think a lot of this ends up depending more on sort of what experiments are in store, what does the lab as a whole need. So you probably can't demand that, say, a neuroimaging lab teaches you optogenetics or some other molecular techniques.
Hey, are you saying something? Because I can't hear you for some reason.
Oh, huh? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I think the last sentence was, I'll back up a bit. The last thing to be thinking about is sort of, I guess, the skills that your mentors will teach you will largely depend on sort of what the goals and priorities of the lab are. So I think you don't necessarily get total control over this, but sort of talking about sort of what the plan is for learning new skills can really help you make sure you have a good sense of what will be happening throughout your time in the lab. A second thing to be talking about, if this is something you value is sort of how often you're going to be meeting with your PI, or maybe how often you'll just meet with your immediate mentor to talk about experimental design, maybe do mini journal clubs or something like that. Trying to get a sense of everyone's schedule and know how frequently you'll be having these meetings can really help you plan out maybe what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. For example, if you're going to be meeting with your supervisor to talk about results weekly, you know that you know how much work you need to put in to get your presentation ready. So knowing really how often you're going to have that type of meeting will make sure that first, you're prepared for it. And second, you sort of know how much time you're going to have for that particular form of intellectual development. I mean, on the same vein, one other thing that's absolutely crucial is clear communication. I think even if you haven't maybe your mentors if concerns occur. If you feel a bit confused about maybe how the biology of immunostaining works, if you don't understand why you're doing a particular step of a technique, or maybe why some of your data isn't coming out quite right, you should feel comfortable just asking your mentor or asking somebody in the lab how to handle that problem. If you maybe need a day off to handle a personal situation, you should definitely communicate that in advance rather than just disappearing without a trace. And I really think that having a strong personal and professional strong professional relationship with your mentor is one of the most important things that you can do to ensure your success in research as a high school student or undergrad. So making sure that you're on the same page on all the major issues is going to be crucial for success. So the next thing I want to talk about sort of in the lab is thinking about maybe what type of responsibilities you want to take on. I think on one end of the spectrum, you could be almost completely guided by your mentor. Maybe the mentor will tell you what assays you need to perform on a particular day, what experiments to run, what data analysis to do, what papers to read. And on the other side, there's effectively what a graduate student or postdoc does. Sort of you design your own experiments, you decide what's important to read, you decide how to analyze the data. And odds are, I think, especially for new researchers, you're going to fall more on the guided mentorship side. But in the long term, maybe especially at the undergrad level, when you have the opportunity you might want to figure out how you can shift the balance a bit towards independence, trying to get your own intellectual creativity into the work. I just put my mouth closer to the microphone so the sound is a bit better. Can you hear me now? Okay, so I'll just go back to the beginning. I'll just go back to a little bit to make sure I made that last point clear. I think on one hand, I think what research can look like is sort of guided work. For example, maybe your mentor could help your mentor would design the experiments, decide what particular methods to use, decide how to analyze the data, decide maybe what papers you should be reading to develop. On the other side is sort of what a grad student might be doing. And this would be sort of designing your own experiments, deciding what papers to read for yourself, designing your own data analyses, really doing all of it on your own. I think, especially in high school, I think your research is probably going to end up much closer to sort of guided work, really learning the methods, learning how to think about a problem. before handling it all on your own. I think especially sort of as you progress into undergrad, maybe as you develop a deeper commitment to a lab, one thing you're going to want to think about is sort of how you can put your own intellectual creativity into the project. I think one question I want to pause to ask you all in the chat is sort of, what does sort of independence in the lab mean to you? Sort of, if I understand sort of how you perceive it, sort of what your goals would be, maybe I could talk about sort of, maybe I can better discuss how to get there and what things to consider to get there. I'll wait a minute or two to read the chat responses, and then we can discuss them as a group. Okay, so one answer is to sort of freely ask and understand the different processes, ask about and understand the processes that are done in the lab. Yeah, that's definitely a good goal, sort of making sure that maybe you know what's going on. Okay, I think some of the next two responses are focusing sort of on being able to do some of the wet lab and experimental work on your own. Potentially do the methods without direct guidance and potentially analyze the data the same way. Okay, so I think one of the big themes that seems to be emerging from these responses is that independence sort of at this stage doesn't necessarily, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean designing all the experiments completely on your own, sort of the same way a grad student does, but sort of independence at this level might mean sort of understanding the experiments on your own, being able to run them with minimal supervision and having enough of an understanding to sort of know what they mean without needing to have everything sort of explained to you each time. So how do we get there? I think the first thing to think about is sort of the knowledge both of the techniques and of sort of the scientific background. I think for knowledge of the techniques, that's something that your mentor would give you. Maybe after you talk with them about what sort of skills you learn, what sort of skills you want to learn, then you'll be in a position where maybe you have a plan for getting to the ability where you can run certain experiments without direct supervision. I think that's definitely a great goal to have. But then to really understand what's going on, you both need to sort of know how to do the procedure and also to know what it is that you're doing. I think that comes from two sources. First, you're going maybe independent reading and biology classes. There, you're going to sort of learn maybe what the biology of these processes looks like and how it works at the molecular or physical level. And then second, you can just talk with your mentor. I mean, if your mentor has agreed to dedicate a lot of time to train you, if you're putting in the work, your mentor is almost certainly going to be happy to teach you more about the biology, help make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you're doing it, and more importantly, why you're doing it in the context of research. I think sort of the big step to be thinking about, especially early on, is going to be sort of transitioning from sort of maybe doing what your mentor says because your mentor says to, sort of doing it because, of course, your mentor encourages you to, and because you understand sort of how the work you're doing fits into the broader goals of the lab. I think getting to that point, it takes a lot of time, but it's incredibly valuable to be able to have a really solid sense of how your work fits into the lab's overall goals. And having that scientific understanding will really set you up to start thinking about maybe how you could, maybe what new questions you could ask and how else you can contribute to the lab's goals. So now, one other thing to think about is that a lot of this is really challenging to do. I mean, it's probably not all going to work right the first time. You're going to probably, you may mess up experiments, misunderstand instructions, be confused. Lots of things are going to be hard. So I think one important thing to note is that research should be fun for you. It should be something that you enjoy doing, something that you want to do. You shouldn't be dreading going into the lab, but doing it maybe because you want it on your resume. So just, I think first, don't take mistakes too hard. I think I've personally made a fair number of mistakes, and yeah, they certainly weren't great, but I learned from them, and I'm now I'd say I'm a better scientist as a result of knowing sort of my blind spots and trying to work to fill them in. I think if you're having concerns, you should definitely talk with your mentor or your principal investigator, express to them how you're feeling, and they can offer advice and guidance. I really think that I think mentors should not only care about you as a scientist, but also as a person. And being in an environment where you can freely express those concerns, ask for their advice is really important. And I think if the mentorship environment itself is getting stressful for you, I'd really encourage you to be proactive, potentially talk with somebody you trust to try to figure out what to do next. Research absolutely should not be stressful. It should not be the source of significant tension and stress. I think if you're in a lab environment that makes you stressed out, that makes you want to quit, you really, I'd really discourage you from forcing yourself to stay in that environment for too long. And then I think the last big piece of advice I have for you. Research is confusing. There are lots of paths to take. There are lots of things you can do. But in my opinion, that's the fun of it. We're not just doing something like classes or a normal job where it's just following a well-known path, following a well-known set of instructions. I think as researchers, we're really at the frontier of knowledge, trying to do something nobody else has ever done before, trying to discover something that nobody else has ever asked. And to me, that's just incredible. So it's going to be confusing, but I'd really encourage you to see that as maybe an opportunity to learn rather than a source of stress. So I'd say just have fun with it, really have fun with it, talk with your mentors, and really do all you can to try to understand the unknown. Thank you. Any questions? I just wanted to leave lots of time to make sure that I can address any questions about research or offer any advice that's relevant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. We actually did have a question that I sent in the chat earlier from Gurmanat from our YouTube Live. He asked, how do you feel about virtual research opportunities?
Sure, virtual research opportunities, right. I guess especially in this time, I think virtual research opportunities can be really exciting. Actually, through a class, I got involved with one virtual research opportunity that I've sort of continued from the spring into the summer, and I think it can be really rewarding. I think virtual research, in particular, if you have computational skills or are willing to learn, virtual research can be a really fun way to sort of learn more about a field and potentially make an impact on a problem you care about. I think the barrier to entry can be can be a little bit high. Sometimes it's daunting to maybe learn a new coding language or figure out how to contribute to a lab while online. But I think if you can find a lab that's willing to offer you some mentorship, offer you guidance, and they have a problem that you can work on, I think it's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And a question from Seth, kind of going off of what you were saying about the barrier to entry. Do you have any tips for getting involved with these research opportunities as an undergraduate student?
At least for the virtual opportunity I got involved with, it was actually part of a class. I think Stanford actually developed a class called Hacking COVID last minute in light of the pandemic. And when I joined, actually, and I think a recent PhD graduate pitched a project trying to better understand how drugs bind to a human protein that's important for COVID infection. I think I actually just got involved because the professor pitched it. Then me and a few others have been working over the past few months to try to really understand this. I think at least I think sometimes opportunities will just show up in your inbox. I think the reason I actually joined my undergrad lab because one, sort of my previous mentor recommended that lab, and two, I just received an email saying that they were looking for undergrads.
Well,
So sometimes opportunities will just come to you. But otherwise, I think if there's a problem that you're really interested in, maybe you should just look up labs that are doing research in the area that you're interested in, and then maybe just reach out to them, express, say, hi, I'm named, school year, and major at school. I was reading your papers on this topic and I found it really interesting. I wanted to ask if there's any way I can do remote work to help out. If you just sort of send a concise email like that and then attach your resume, maybe they'll have opportunities for you. Maybe they'll have recommendations on who else to reach out to, and maybe they just won't get back to you. But I think if you're proactive about reaching out to faculty, if this is something you really want to do, I think that with sort of enough time and effort reaching out to people, you'll be able to find a place that's a good fit for you. Though one thing to point out is that I guess a lot of people, including the professors, are really stressed about the pandemic and have to deal with a lot of extra work themselves to manage it. So I think it's likely going to be harder to find a virtual opportunity now than it might be during, say, a more normal time.
yeah, for sure. That's definitely something to keep in mind. And we have another question from Weiwei from the audience. Are professors that don't have classes with able to work with you for research?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't take a single class with the professor I worked with throughout my entire undergrad experience. I think the big thing the big thing to think about is sort of, I think in the lab you're going to be able to learn in the lab you're probably going to be able to learn about the subject matter sort of organically outside of a particular class. But sort of I think you do want to I'm trying to figure out how to do this, word this. I guess to back up, having a class is one way you can get to know a professor. You can perform well in the class. The professor starts to realize that you have a genuine interest in the subject that they've dedicated their lives to. And then if you ask about a research opportunity, they may be more likely to say yes because you've been in the class. However, you don't have to do that. You can just say, email a professor, maybe at your university or at a local university, and just tell them how you're really excited about their work, want to contribute. And either they will have space or they won't. So I think it's just a matter of sort of reaching out to them, showing them in some way, either through a nice email or through the class, that you're enthusiastic about their topic. I think they're professors because they love science. They love mentoring. They love mentoring students who are trying to pursue science. So I think just demonstrating your interest in their field is a really great way to sort of get your foot in the door, even if that you haven't taken a class with them.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And going on to the next question from Stuti, what advice do you have for international undergrad students that want to get involved with research opportunities but live outside of the United States and Canada?
Okay, I guess just one clarification question. Do you mean international students who are going to university outside of US and Canada, or sort of maybe international students who have come into the US or Canada for undergraduate studies?
I think we would have to get more clarification from Stuti on that.
Right.
I guess you can answer whichever way works best for you in that case.
Okay. I think I guess my general advice I think should still hold. Just it, okay, for those who come to the US, right? Like I think I can't think of a single professor who I've met that would just decline to mentor a student solely because they are they are from outside the US or Canada. I think really the same advice should hold, just reaching out to the professors, expressing a genuine interest in their work, reading up on them before you go in to speak with them. I think if you do those things, I think the professors should be receptive, though I can't guarantee that they'll have space, especially during the pandemic. I think there may be special logistics that you have to handle, say for graduate school in the States or Canada, or maybe paid summer research. I really can't speak to those challenges, but I think either your professor or maybe the international students support workers at your university would be much better, would have plans for how to do it. I personally know some international students who have stayed on campus over the summer to do research. So it's definitely possible. And I think a lot of the sort of scientific side of things are the same, just there might be a few additional logistical challenges to overcome along the way.
Yeah, great answer. Our next question is from Ashia from the audience. How should a high school student go about approaching professors to find research opportunities?
Okay, I think the answer is going to be very similar to college students. You just try to read about their work. You try to think about sort of whether the lab is a good fit, and then just reach out to them, express interest in their lab. If you, I mean, I think some labs might be it might be a bit harder to get into labs as a high school student. I think first off, because of transportation getting to and from the lab. Second, because of the timing concerns. But say if you're looking for, say, a summer research opportunity, you can just start emailing them a little bit in advance. I think one thing that I'd encourage you to do, maybe especially as a high school student, is to try to look at the lab's members page. Just try to see if they have had high schoolers work there before, or if they even have a lot of undergrads. I think looking for if they have had lots of high school students or undergrads, that tends to be a good sign that they are going to be a place that really values mentoring younger students. Maybe if it's one undergrad in a 30-person lab, the rest of the people are grad students and postdocs, they might not be as well equipped to mentor younger students. I guess these are all sort of generalizations. I think a lot of the specific, you'd have to probably look at the lab page and try to figure out the specifics for yourself. But generally, sort of a lab having mentored high school students or having mentored lots of undergrads is a good sign if you're trying to find a research position, if you're trying to find a lab that would be a good fit for you as a high school student.
Yeah, for sure. And I know there are also a lot of other programs that are already been established to take high school students, such as the Research Science Institute.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
also worth looking into.
That completely left my mind. So I can elaborate. yeah, they're also going to be, that's sort of, I guess the advice I offered is sort of for independently reaching out to local faculty. There are going to be research programs, like I think one of the particularly well-known ones is RSI, or Research Science Institute at MIT. There are also going to be lots of local programs. For example, the one I did at the Salk Institute that might sort of offer opportunities to get high school students into labs. I think often, in many cases, the applications for these might open pretty early. I think in the January to March range. It could be in the January to March range, but it could be earlier or later depending on the specific program. So I think definitely be proactive to check if there are any programs like that in your area. And I would definitely encourage you to apply to those structured programs. I think if you can find a structured research program for high school students, I'd very highly recommend participating in one, because they're probably going to have extra career development opportunities. And they've already handpicked mentors who are really enthusiastic about having high school students in the lab.
Yeah, definitely. And one more question from Dorothy. How do we find research professors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think either pick maybe a nearby university sort of within a reasonable driving distance, or the university you go to, and just look at the labs that are available. I think lots of major research universities are going to have plenty of neuroscientists there, so you can just look through the faculty profiles, read about their labs on their lab websites, and then just decide whether the lab seems interesting to you. Then sort of go through the general process, reading about their work, send a nice email asking to meet them, and then potentially join if you think it's a good fit. So I think the big thing is sort of just look at the local universities or maybe private research institutions, and then just read about the different professors there. That's the best way to find them, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So that is the end of all of our questions. And thank you so much to Jacob for hosting this workshop. If you have any last words, you can definitely let us know.
Yeah, of course. I think research is really fun. It's made my undergrad experience a lot better. And I would definitely, I think if it's something you're interested in, I definitely encourage you all to get involved. It's a lot of fun.
For sure. Thank you so much, Jacob. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot from Jacob, and have an incredible day wherever you guys are. And we'll see you for our next workshop at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And huge thank you to Jacob for being our first workshop host. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.